Well, before I start my story, I want to ask you guys a question, see if I can get a show of hands. How many of you have had to move from one place to another with your parents growing up? You had to move? Okay. You had to move too, huh? Well, I had to move when I was quite a bit older than you guys were, when I was about 16. But when I was about 9, just a little bit older than you guys, there was a kid in my school by the name of Dwayne. And he moved right in the middle of the school year. He didn't know anybody. And it was hard for him because not only did he not know anybody, but for the first week that he was there, nobody would sit with him, not by him in the classroom, not by him in like the lunchroom. And they wouldn't sit by him because his pants were really worn and they had patches on them. And he had a shirt that was pretty old and ratty. And he had a jacket where one of the other kids said, oh, his parents must have gotten that from a thrift store or something. That couldn't have been something they bought for him. And they were just being really kind of mean. And I remember he seemed like a really nice kid. He would be kind to people when they would like ask him his name and stuff. And it was clear he wanted to play with other kids, but nobody wanted to spend time. And one time I was going to go over. Nobody wanted to. And when I told my friends I wanted to like invite him over, they said, well, if you play with Dwayne, we're not going to play with you anymore. Well, I didn't want to lose my friends, so I didn't go play with him that day. But I felt really bad enough that I had a knot in my stomach for the whole afternoon. And when I went home, I went to my mom and I said to her, you know, there's this kid there and he seems really nice, but nobody wants to play with him because his clothes aren't as nice. And my mom just kind of looked at me a little funny. And she said, well, how do you think that made Dwayne feel? How do you think you'd feel if you were Dwayne and you were in a new school? And I just looked at her and I said, well, I think I'd feel pretty lonely. And she says, you know what's worse? He might be a really good friend, and you're missing out just because you're listening to what everybody else is saying. So when I went to school the next day, and it was time for me to go to lunch, what do you think I did? Who do you think I sat next to? I I think that's what I did the day before. No, I went over, and I sat next to Dwayne. And I said, hi, my name is David, and I want to know where you're from. And we started talking, and he told me about his family, and he told me about his 2 dogs that he had. And at the end of lunch, he brightened up, and he said, how would you like to come over to my house? Now, at this point, my friends weren't even letting me, like, sit next to them. They were really upset. I was, like, spending time with Dwayne. But I thought about what my mom said, and I said, sure, I'd love to come over. So that afternoon, my mom drove me over to Dwayne's house and dropped me off. And his house was really kind of an old house. It was kind of run down and stuff. But he didn't pay any attention to the house. He said, I've got to take you to my backyard and show you something. I was like, what is he going to show me? And he took me over to his backyard, and there was this huge pen. And in that pen were these 2 big pigs. In fact, I had never even seen farm animals before. And these 2 pigs came up, and they just started sniffing his hand like they were dogs and saying hello to him. And then he said, these are Chet and Brewster. Chet and Brewster, say hello to my new friend Dave. And they just immediately came up and started snuffling my hand. And he said, it's okay if you ate bacon. They won't like bite or anything. And then he said, I've got to show you something else. And he took me up to this tree house, and we started climbing up into this big oak tree. And he showed me this house that his dad had helped made of all this wood and stuff. What do you think we found when we got up into the tree house? You want to guess? What do you think was in the tree house?
A boy.
Well, yeah, Dwayne is a boy, and he was in the tree house. What else you think was there?
A friend.
You're right there, too, because I had Dwayne there as a friend. He also had his other friend, which his name was Freddie, and he was his Labrador dog that he had up there waiting for him. And he had a refrigerator. And he opened up the refrigerator and he had juice boxes and he had sandwiches up there. And I was like, how do you have a refrigerator up in there? And he pointed proudly to this extension cord that ran down the tree and all the way over to the house. And he said, well, my dad helped me with the tree house, but he thought that if I had a friend up here, we wouldn't want to be hungry. And so he wanted to make sure that we had snacks up here. So when I came home that day, my mom just kind of looked at me a little knowingly and said, did you have a fun time? And I said, yeah. And I told her about the pigs, and I told her about the treehouse, and I even told her about the fridge. She looked at me and she said, you know, you would have missed out on an awful lot if you had listened to your friends and not played with him just because he was wearing different clothes. And you know what the funny thing was? When I went to school the next day, my friends were kind of tired of giving me the cold shoulder. They went up and played with me. And one or two of them even went over and started talking with Dwayne and stuff. So I want you to remember that, because if I had been so worried about the outside things, what Dwayne had been wearing, I would have missed all of the inside of how cool of a friend he really was. And does Jesus look more at the outside, or does he look more at the heart of what people are? That's right. So remember that, because this is the very same thing Jesus would want us to do when he's here with us. And just remember, if you do that, sometime you might end up finding a really cool new friend on the way. Thank you for listening.